With over 40 video game titles in the franchise and spanning 9 generations, Pokemon is the second highest grossing video game franchise of all time. And our adventures have taken us all around the globe from Kanto to Paldea. But no matter where or what Pokemon brings us, we are always posed with the same task of choosing a starter Pokemon. Which begs the question, which is the best starter Pokemon for every generation, starting with Kanto? So the Kanto region is where it all began and where we meet the first starter trio of the series, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. And a lot of people I know, including myself, always chose Charmander as their starter pick. And he seems to be arguably the most popular of the three. But despite this popularity, the best pick for the Kanto region is actually going to be Bulbasaur. Not only is it super effective against the first 2 gym leaders, Brock and Misty, and can hold its own relatively well against the 2 subsequent gyms that follow, but Bulbasaur evolves into his final evolution several levels before his counterpart. Meaning, during the mid-game, you have access to Venusaur much earlier, which really helps for some of those main story battles. It is also worth noting that Venusaur absolutely wrecked Giovanni. Notably, there are aspects of the later game in which Venusaur kind of struggles, but overall, Bulbasaur is going to be my #1 pick for the Kanto region. Next on this list is going to be the Johto region, sporting the starter trio of Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile. Right off the bat, Meganium is absolutely trash. None of its attack stats reach or exceed 100, its speed stat makes it incredibly slow, and most of its type matchups are horrible, leaving you to an uphill battle for a majority of the main game. On top of that, the move pool Meganium gets access to is very lackluster, leaving it to be described as basically the poor man's Venusaur. Next, we have Totodile. Personally, I actually really love Totodile. He's got a relatively decent build, and Feraligatr can be a devastating late game sweeper. But he is a physical water type attacker, which doesn't actually allow for him to use his ice or water type moves very effectively. And on top of that, good water type attackers are actually just relatively easy to find in Johto. Finally, we're gonna look at Cyndaquil. He's super effective against 3 gym leaders and carries through several parts of the Elite Four with relative ease. Typhlosion is also a great special type attacker, and its stats are more in line for this type of fighting style. Essentially, all of the stats are where they need to be to make the starter excel compared to its counterparts. It's also super effective against more relevant main game battles, and basically for those reasons, I'm gonna have to say Cyndaquil is my pick for Generation 2. Jumping right over to the Hoenn region, which sports the starter trio of Mudkip, Torchic, and Trico. Now, all 3 starters are actually relatively good picks, great even, each of which excels at its own respective stat. However, it's pretty well known that Mudkip is a top tier pick in Hoenn. Being super effective against 3 gym leaders and Tate and Liza's Psychic Rock combo, Swampert is able to hold its own against most major battles, both early and late game. And on top of that, the Hoenn region doesn't actually have a grass type gym leader, basically taking away one of the few weaknesses you'd have to concern yourself over if you chose Mudkip as your starter. Antoinette from the future here. What's up, trainers? It's Antoinette from the future here, and if you guys are enjoying this Pokemon related content, do me a favor and go ahead and smash that subscribe button, like the video, and comment down below what your favorite starter Pokemon is. We have finally reached my personal favorite generation on the list, Gen 4 of the Sinnoh region, the starter combo of Piplup, Chimchar, and Turtwig. Now, these starters are actually regarded as some of the best in the franchise. All 3 are great picks, and there can be an argument for really choosing any of them. However, with Chimchar and Turtwig being super effective against 3 gym leaders and 1 Elite Four member respectively, they do have a slight advantage over Piplup, who is only super effective against 2 gym leaders and 1 Elite Four member. So, which is better for the game, Chimchar or Turtwig? Well, my pick is gonna have to be Chimchar, as Turtwig does sport a 4 times weakness to ice, and on top of that, there are actually only a handful of fire type Pokemon that's really available to you for a good chunk of the game, so grabbing yourself a solid fire type out of the gate can really help you in the later game. Jumping over to the Unova region. Now, Unova is another region where none of the starters are actually necessarily bad, but Tepig is by far the best choice amongst the 3. Not only do both Snivy and Oshawott evolutions remain a pure grass and water type respectively, but Emboar gains the fighting secondary typing that absolutely annihilates all of Team Plasma's dark type Pokemon. And although the league does change dramatically between both copies of Black, White, and their sequels, Tepig still remains the strongest pick in all 4 titles, at least considering main story elements. Tepig does suffer from a slow speed stat that can sweep out your team if you lack defensive capabilities, but comparative damage output more than makes up for this Pokemon, which is why Tepig is going to be our choice for Gen 5. Moving right over to the Kalos region, sporting the trio of Fennekin, Chespin, and Froakie. Right out the gate, Chespin has a difficult time against most gym leaders in the game. While he does hold up relatively well against some of your rival battles and Team Flare, in terms of overall utility, Chespin kind of falls flat compared to its counterparts. Which leaves Fennekin or Froakie. Fennekin is actually amazing at gym battles and is rather useful in the Elite Four. However, the entire faction of Team Flare seems to really favor dark types, which Delphox really struggles with, which leaves Froakie as my #1 pick for the Kalos region. Like Chespin, Froakie excels at battles against your rival and Team Flare, but perhaps does so maybe a bit more effectively, and outside of a few electric type matchups, Greninja doesn't really have to worry too much about super effective moves for a majority of the game. Now we're gonna take a look at the Alola region, a beautiful island paradise sporting the starter trio of Litten, Rowlet, and Popplio. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Out of these three, Rowlet is by far the most popular. It starts out as a grass and flying type Pokemon and then drops the flying in favor of Ghost, making Decidueye the first starter to be immune to both normal and fighting type attack. But outside of the beginning battle with like Wishy-Washy and some late game battles regarding the Elite Four, the majority of the game Rowlet does seem to struggle against almost everyone, including Team Skull, which you will find the most often throughout the game. And for this reason, Rowlet is actually arguably the worst out of the three starters, which leaves Litten and Popplio. So which is better for your long-term journey? I'm actually gonna have to go with Popplio on this one. The fact that it sports the dual fairy water typing means it can stand its ground through a majority of the game, and also being able to TM the move Psychic to fend off any poison type bumps this Pokemon up to the #1 spot. Now don't get me wrong, Litten's actually a very close second on here, but that fairy typing really just pushes Popplio ahead of the rest of the pack. We have finally made it to the Galar region, one of the most interesting generations on this list, as the discussion of which starter is the best kind of changes a bit depending on which copy of Sword or Shield you decide to pick up. With the starter trio of Grookey, Sobble, and Scorbunny, there can be some slight debate on which is actually the best choice. But after much deliberation, my choice absolutely has to be Grookey. It's not my first starter pick when I play the games, but it is undeniably the best one out of the three. The first two gyms are an absolute breeze for you, and by the end of the game, you are a super tanky Rillaboom with a high HP stat. But it is worth noting that if you did end up choosing Shield as your copy of the game, Scorbunny isn't actually that bad of an option due to the gym changes. And finally, we have made it to the Paldea region. Fuecoco. Even though Scarlet and Violet is super easy and you can really choose whatever starter you want, if you want the easiest version of the game, just pick Fuecoco. That's it. Paldea was easy. There wasn't much for me to say. Literally, pick what you want. Super easy game.